The following talk was given at the Insight Meditation Center in Redwood City, California. Please visit our website at audiodharma.org.
So this topic today is about Dharma and resurrection. So that's part of a series that I'm doing here for a month, subbing here for your group, the topic of which is about Dharma and magic. So last week we talked about Harry Potter, the Dharma of Harry Potter. So who was here for that one? Small amount, yes. A select Harry Potter group who collected for that one, I think. And there actually is a little resurrection going on in Harry Potter. Those of you who saw or read the last book/movie of that, there's some piece of that, of a sort of dying and being reborn again, coming back from the dead. And that's actually mostly what we think of when we consider resurrection, right? So resurrection is about coming back to life from death, like dying and coming back to life. And resurrection, of course, figures very prominently in many spiritual traditions. For example, in the Christian tradition, that's a central piece of the teachings around Jesus' life and death and the resurrection, right? And the meaning of that. So what is up with this topic of resurrection and the Dharma? So what's the teachings around this? What do you have to look forward to or not look forward to in terms of renewed life? So this is a big question in many religions and philosophical traditions as well. What happens when you die? Many people come to some spiritual practice or something with some question around this. What's going to happen when I die? So the teachings of the Buddha, the focus is actually on what happens when you live. So the practice of mindfulness, of this heartfulness, even what we were doing here just now, I feel is very much of helping us to understand that question. Like, what does it mean to be alive? So once you understand what it means to be alive, then you could understand better what it means to not be alive. That is, to be dead, right? And I said, the mindful are alive. Those without mindfulness are as if already dead. So you could even reflect back just in the last, half-hour period of time when we were sitting together. There might have been periods when you felt very present and connected to your body and knowing what was going on in your experience. And then there may have been times when it was just like, whoosh, gone, right? Lost in thought for some amount of time, or just daydreaming or something, or who knows, kind of drifting off into sleep, something, right? But then a moment came again, perhaps even just with the ringing of the bell, that usually does it, right? When you're back, right? Oh, here I am, okay. Yeah. So what happens in that time in between? Right? Like, where is that? What happens? So in some ways you could consider even that as the sort of coming back to life in those moments. And our whole life in some ways is a sequence of this, of being present, being not present, being present, being not present, like this. Right? Seeing, not seeing. And the Dharma teachings around resurrection of the body, the relationship to the body and the teachings of Buddha is pretty down to earth, like very cut and dry, right? So the body is not looked upon in any kind of romantic way. So in fact, the reflections around the body are ones like, my body is subject to aging. I have not gone beyond aging. My body is subject to sickness, to illness. I have not gone beyond illness. This body is subject to death. I have not gone beyond death. Right? So nothing romantic about that, right? It's like, you take birth in a human body, and even as sophisticated as we are, and, as many different things as we do, we're basically in the physical form animals. We have this kind of mammal life that takes place, which involves eating food and drinking liquids, and then defecating and urinating, and getting tired and needing to sleep, and hair growing out of different parts of us, and trying to keep that in order, and needing to wash ourselves very often, or else we start to smell bad, and all kinds of things like that. So the body is regarded as just very cut and dry, like seeing it for what it is, which is actually an animal form. And, it's easier for us to regard other animals in this way. So you see like a dog or, raccoon or, something like that. And, it's less, maybe with dogs, some people have some sort of mythologizing around them. But, it's like non-glamorous animals, It's just like, oh yeah, they're just doing their animal thing, and they mate, and they get hungry, and, they get hurt, and they bleed, and, different things like that, right? So in relationship to the body, the teachings of the Dharma, it's pretty basic, and there's not a lot of, thus, encouragement to regard your body as some thing that you can keep around forever, right? And it's important for us to take care of the body, to give good nutrition, to be kind to yourself, to exercise, etc., but it's not with an eye towards the body being your vehicle for eternity, right? Like when the body goes into the ground, it too will decay after you die, right? And that actually happens to everyone. So some people might stave that out temporarily with their cryogenic chambers, etc., right? But basically, anyone dies, no matter how good looking, no matter how rich, no matter how famous. Once you go in the ground, the process of nature continues, decay of the body, and going back to the earth. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it just is the truth of the way things are. And that really is one of my main understandings about the teachings of the Dharma, is it's understanding the way things actually are. Taking a really honest look at how things are in truth. Not how we want them to be, not how they show them on TV, not how they are in storybooks, not how they are in our imagination, but actually how things are. And then in understanding that and in living more and more in harmony with that, we're able to live life of less suffering. We're able to actually see into what is actually true about ourselves, about others, about our existence, about reality, about who we are, about what leads to happiness, about what leads to suffering, and about what ultimately we can rest on. And one of the answers to what you can ultimately rest on is not the body. Right? So not the body. Now we learn this in little ways over and over again, right? But it's also good to be honest with yourself about what is your relationship to the body. Right? So, think about from the time that you're very small, and all of us were kids at some point in smaller bodies, right? And then whatever else happened in your life, we had enough nutrition to get to this stage, right, of adulthood, physically at least, right? And there's been so many changes along the way. So in some ways, it's this idea of like different lives. You've lived so many different lives, even in this time. So you had your toddler life, you had your baby life, you had your toddler life. I was walking around the neighborhood a little bit before the coming here for this talk, and past the Sequoia High School, right? And there was a sign on one of the islands, like, Sequoia High School students are not to congregate in this park between 8 and 2 p.m., right? They're trying to keep them in school or something, right? So I was remembering, oh yeah, and I saw some of them hanging around and said, oh, the high school life, right? There's the high school life there. And then, then whatever after that life, and then, maybe you take a certain job and you take birth in a certain way in that identity, right? And then that fades away. And then maybe you have a partner, maybe you don't. Actually, I think relationships are interesting because I think in each of those relationships you take birth in this new way, right? So the new birth in this, and then that dies, right? Or you become a parent, that's also a new birth, a new role, that dies, right? Move into a different stage of your life. So there's some continuity in all of that, and yet there's this continued rebirth, sort of restarting of a new stage of something. In order to move on to the new thing, you actually have to let go of the old thing. And sometimes that's easy for us, and we're like, good riddance to the old thing, I'm ready to move on. And sometimes we struggle with it too. So similarly with the body. So there may have been times in your life when you had a good relationship to the body, when you felt positively about the body. And you thought, oh yeah, this is great. I feel very strong, I feel very healthy. And it's at those times that if this idea of immortality or resurrection or continued life occurs, it seems like a good idea. Right? So usually this idea of coming back and being the body continuing on forever doesn't occur when you're, for example, in the dentist chair, right? You don't think like, oh, eternal life, that sounds good. It's like eternal root canal or something like that, right? But that's a part of it too, right? So inevitably, as I was saying, inevitably, like you have teeth, and teeth are made of enamel, and they wear down in different ways. I recently had some rude awakening around this because I went to the dentist, and they pointed out that like my teeth have started to like shift around in different directions in my mouth. And I actually suffered through one of the painful births I had was like adolescent with braces, like around maybe 13 or so, like 8th grade. A birth that I do not relish taking again in this life or any life in the future. So I thought like, I thought I'd done that, I thought I finished with that. But, apparently impermanence is still active with the teeth, etc. And, I was supposed to wear a retainer for the rest of my life, but at that time of orthodontistry, they didn't know that, so they didn't actually like tell you to keep doing that forever. So, here we are, right? So this relationship to the body, and if you think about it, like in this eternal, I think, you can hear me talking about this, like it's so far from me now to think like, oh yeah, please let this body continue on forever. Like please, after death, let this body be reborn. Let me continue on in some way. I feel like I'm maybe not doing it justice in some way because I know a lot of people have that feeling and belief. So if you do, then like please challenge me, ask questions, whatever, because it's there a lot in our culture and religion, etc. Right? So the Buddhist teaching actually challenges us to pay attention then thus to our identification with the body. So what is our relationship to our body? And we often have this idea that like there's a me, and there's this me that either is the body, or there's a me that lives inside the body. There's some sort of like mysterious like consciousness-like thing, sort of inside, that then looking down and like that, right? So one of the challenges in the practice is for us to actually locate that. Like pay attention and see if you can locate that. And locate that means that if either I am the body, I own the body in some way, then surely like I would have control over that in some way. So surely I would be able to make that be the way that I wanted it to be. And that would include being able to make it not change in ways that were unpleasing to me. Right? And there's a certain amount of agency that you have, certainly some of the time. So here I'm like, waving my hands around. It seems like I want to do that, right? Trying to make a point, etc. So, but I can't do other things too. And there are things that I used to be able to do that I can't do now. So I recently started to play basketball again, and also in a past life I was like a big athlete, like very focused on that and got a lot of joy in that and so on, and really enjoyed it. And now in my middle life period here, like sort of picking and choosing, kind of coming back to it. So someone invited me to play basketball at this pickup basketball game in the gym. So I was excited about it. It's like, I know I have those basketball shoes somewhere, and I pulled them out, and here's a sign about how long it's been since I played, that when I tried to put them on, the shoe actually disintegrated in my hand. Like the heel actually, ripped off the base of the shoe. So I was like, oh yeah, right. Impermanence again, right? It's been quite some time. So that gave me a warning about how I would actually be able to play, once I actually found some shoes to actually get into the basketball game, right? But it's like, well, what is my relationship to the body in that way? So different parts of the body, they change, they shift, it's challenging. And here's where the practice is really helpful. Like it's really helpful to practice noticing, so what is our relationship to the body? And it's helpful to practice this now when you have your faculties about you to be able to do that. Right? Like it's really helpful to do that. This is partly why it's practice. So, if you're able to show up here and sit here like, relatively fine for, half an hour or something like that, then you have good conditions in your life to be able to do that right now. Those conditions are not always there. So at different times you might fall ill, for example, or you might have a lot of pain, or you might not have the ability to come here, and so on, right? So this practice actually helps carry us through those difficult times too. And I've seen that in myself. in times when I've had a sudden injury or something suddenly difficult happens, and the practice supports me. Like having practiced seeing what's true, having practiced a relationship to experience and to life is incredibly helpful. So I am subject to aging. Aging is unavoidable. I am subject to illness. Illness is unavoidable. I am subject to death. Death is unavoidable. But now one other meaning of resurrection could be that if you die, there is new life, right? So this is actually one of the teachings that comes through in Christianity in a certain way. And sometimes it's taken literally and sometimes metaphorically. But I think it is actually this death and the continued letting go and allowing whatever it is new to come through, which is one way in which resurrection can be seen in these teachings. So this is true in actually each moment of our existence. So even as we sit here and we pay attention to our life, it's this constant stream of sights, sounds, tastes, smells, touches, and mental images. And as long as we're able to be there with that flow, as long as the presence is able to be there, let it go, let it go, let it go, right? Then we're in the flow of that. Once we start to try to hold on to some of those things, attach, right? Grasp onto them, or lean back, lean towards things in the past, reach out for the illusory future, then we start to suffer. Then we're like out of that flow, right? There's some problem there. So it's actually in being able to let go, let go, let go, let go, let go. So basically like die, 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 you know, and then be reborn, reborn, reborn. So in each moment actually, it's like new, it's this, it's this, it's this. Right? So trying to come at life as freshly as possible in some way, right? So trying to be as present as possible with what's actually really happening now, not my idea of what's happening, not my memory of what's happening, but what is actually happening right now. So incredibly useful, for example, in relationship with people. So a lot of times we come into a conversation with someone and we're not able to actually see who they are. We're not actually really able to hear what they're saying to us or where they are or what they're trying to express to us, because we have this idea already about who they are. You know, like we've already decided, like this is this person, they're kind of like this, they're always like this. So we're kind of seeing them through that screen, right, and not able to see them new, fresh. Now this doesn't mean that you don't, of course, apply wisdom, apply knowledge, apply understanding. Right? But knowing that, okay, so this is something from the past, this is some understanding about this, and okay, let's see what's presenting now. Right? So blending those two. So the encouragement then is actually to die now to the things that we usually think are ourselves. So let go now of those things. And then you actually can enjoy. You can have a different relationship to those things. You can have a different relationship to your body. You can have a different relationship to your objects and possessions. You can have actually a different relationship to life. So understanding that all things are impermanent, and thus nothing is actually under our permanent control. So even the things that seem to be under our control, we're basically just in some convenient temporary relationship to them, right? Understanding that. So for example, you might have, parked your car or bicycle outside, right? Which you consider like my car, my bicycle. And then usually there's some assumption that like I will go back to that place and that will be there, right? And I hope that's true for all of you. But sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it's not, because even though, we have a certain relationship to that is like our car, our bicycle, right? It also is not completely under our control all the time, right? And even when it is, so I actually have had my car for a very long time, for I think 16, 17 years now. But the car is like starting to get rusty and stuff, right? It's starting to like get dinged up in different places. It's actually very dinged up, but it's starting to become more noticeable to me that it's dinged up, maybe, and I could have body work done and this and that, but like, the thing is aging too, right? Just as my body is aging and my basketball shoes aged and disintegrated, right? The car also is aging. So so in some sense, like I like own that, I have a title and all this, right? but also it's like, okay, that's just describing in some way that's convenient for regular conversation, my relationship to that car, but it's not totally under my control. Like I can't make it stop changing, rusting, whatever, you know. It too has its own sort of natural process that's going through, even mechanical objects, right? And so even more so like this chassis, you know, this chassis here, right? Which then, you know, you have different scars that tell different stories. And there's something beautiful about it too. I mean, I want to say there's both the part that's like the cut and dry, like, yeah, the body decays and smells and grows in these different ways. But also there's something beautiful about the uniqueness of each person and your body, and the stories that the scars on your body tell, and you know what that says about you and your unique life, etc. So I think there's something also about appreciating that at the same time as not attaching to that too. So the attaching to that part also means that, like, well, my scars and my stories are much more interesting than any of yours, right? Or something like that, or anyone else I might meet, right? So, you know, you have to kind of check yourself on that and notice your relationship to your body, notice your relationship to other people's bodies as well. Right? So I'll bring it around to Harry Potter again, just you know, to keep the consistency in our series. You know, so in the Harry Potter thing, there's this epic battle between you know, Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort, right? And Harry Potter is this sort of wizard, ostensibly the protagonist of this story, and you see him growing up through these books and movies and all this stuff, and he becomes this wizard. And then this Voldemort is like this sort of the enemy, or, you know, characterized as the sinister evil one. But actually the truth is that they each have sort of some little part of each other in themselves, and they're actually connected, right? So it's not as clear as like this one's good and this one's evil. Like they're actually deeply connected and intertwined. And then actually in the final book, now I don't feel bad giving the spoiler because it's been out for a long time, and you might not even understand, you know, it from either what I'm about to say or even from reading the book or seeing the movie. But there's some piece of it that's like this epic battle that involves actually both of them dying, and then Harry actually sort of being reborn, actually sort of making a choice, being reborn again, sort of coming back in a different way. And I think that is also the promise of what we can learn through our practice. And in the teachings, there's this piece about liberation, and, you know, you've heard about like nibbana, and it's often described in these very cryptic ways. And one of the descriptions is like the deathless. Yeah. So the deathless for nibbana. So it's like that which is not born and does not die. So because it's not born, it does not die, right? So both of those sides are gone. So this is also sort of the kind of a conundrum to put to you. It's like, well, what does that mean, right? So we could talk about that a long time and say different words and stuff, but really it's part of that same puzzle of like, what does it mean to live, right? It's like the other side of that puzzle. So what does it mean to live? So if you understand what it means to live, then in seeing into that deeply in your experience, then you get a taste of what actually that means. Like what is it, if anything, is there that is deathless? And even in the language, like there's no thing, so it's not a thing, you know, but there's a no hyphen thingness that's deathless. So on that cryptic note, I'll stop and see if anyone has any questions or comments about Dharma and resurrection. Or reflections, or what does that mean to you about resurrection? What's your relationship to that? You're gonna have Mike coming over to you, yeah.
Actually, I'm kind of lost on why you brought up deathless.
You're lost on why I brought up deathless. So that's a translation of, like, do you want me to actually explain to you why, or that you're just making that comment about it?
No, can you please explain?
Yeah, sure. So I was using that as one English translation of nibbana or nirvana. Have you heard of that? Like nirvana, right? So one of the translations of that, there are many, like, it's one of those words that are actually very difficult to translate or even to speak about so much, but one of the translations is about the deathless. So some of it I think is about, in our, I may be a little bit more like practical about it. So in our search, in our life, oftentimes there's some, whether implicit or explicit, seeking of something that we can actually rest in. Like, what can we actually take refuge in? What can we rest in? Like, what is going to be reliable for us in our life, right? And we do this in kind of mundane ways, like, oh, if I marry this person, they'll stay with me, or, if I move to this place, it'll be a good place, or if I take this job, like we look for security in some way. If I make a certain amount of money, et cetera, right? And we're constantly doing that in like small and big ways, I would say, right? So the trouble is that in a world in which everything is always changing, like everything is actually changing, there's no lasting stability to be found, right? In any of these things, right? Or in like the pursuit of them also, which oftentimes we think like, oh, it wasn't that thing, like it wasn't that relationship that was the, it was just that guy, like I'll go for this one, and then, oh, this wasn't that one, it was that, I'll find another one, right? As opposed to like, actually it's the pursuit of that, like the seeking permanent satisfaction in that, seeking some kind of like stability that you can hold on forever in some way, right? It's actually that pursuit that is the mistake. It's not actually necessarily like that object or person or thing, right? So in saying that, I'm not actually like condemning marriage or permanent relationships or anything, but I think it's true that in any relationships that you have, the relationship changes as people grow, right? And the relationships that stay together are as people sort of grow, mature, their interests change, etc. They're able to grow together or support each other in their individual growth or whatever, right? But it's not like, if you marry someone when you're 18, like you're the same exact people when you're 68, right? Unlikely, right? So you go through this journey together. So this thing about the deathless is, so what is it that you can, every experience, anything is born, and anything that's born dies. So if there's anything that's born, it's going to die, and thus that is not a good place to seek permanent refuge. So then what is a place where you can actually seek refuge? So we'll only be in something that actually is not born and thus does not die, so hence deathless.
Thank you.
Yeah. Others? Yeah.
So, like you used Harry Potter as an example, choosing, he made a choice, apparently. I didn't see the movie or read the last book. So he made a choice to come back and have a different way. Can you speak to our role in reincarnation and whether we have a choice or not?
Okay. So there is some, like the focus of Buddhist teaching is not about reincarnation per se, but there is a lot of talk about that it's sort of like this cycle that continues on. And that actually is sort of the teachings in Hinduism as well as in Buddhism in that area of the world, is that when there is death, then there is some continuation of stream of consciousness in some way that will continue in this realm or in another realm. So could be in connection with a physical body that seems to be like human body, animal body, etc., or could be even in other realms that are more ephemeral, etc., right? So the question about like, do you have choice about that? That's sort of your question about it. So like Harry Potter, does one have choice? I don't know, actually. I mean, some of the teaching is that a lot of that is the result of karma. So your actions plant the seeds for different things that will arise for you in the future, potentially arise, right? And among them, at the moment of taking birth, again, with physical / non-physical form, has to do with that level of birth, right? So in some ways it seems like there's some influence that happens, but from my understanding, now this is all like hearsay, that it's only the most actually conscious and sort of highly developed that would be able to sort of make conscious choice around that stuff. But now I'm completely talking like hearsay, and I don't have direct experience to be able to pass that on. But it is, in fact, actually good incentive, further incentive, even if this might be true, to actually practice mindfulness as best you can, Because, actually even like in the moment of death, like, the thing about like, oh, it's really good we have conditions now to practice, is true, because then it's really helpful to be able to be clear and be as present as possible and as equanimous as possible, like when you're sick, and then actually through the process of death even, And it takes a really, it takes a lot to be able to do that, Like the average person is not going to be able to do that. Like that's a tough challenge, Like sometimes it's hard to meditate on the bus, right? So then, you're going to be able to be present during, death. That's a tall order. But like this is called practice because it's actually practice, And each time you get to practice, and each time that you like blow it and lose it, and then you come back, and we're planting those seeds of mindfulness. And I've actually seen this very powerfully come back for myself in times of difficulty when it wasn't actually a time when I would be like, oh, now I must do this, now I must be as present as possible, but just like that force of that practice coming back to meet me and be present. And actually also many of you might know that Eugene Cash, who's a teacher in tradition at San Francisco Insight, he was on the Buddhist bicycle pilgrimage, which is an annual bicycle journey, turning the wheels to turn the wheels, they say, turning the wheel. And unfortunately he met with a very serious bike accident on that, and hurt his body and also hurt his head, and he's recuperating, and he's in the hospital and stuff. And from the accounts of his wife Pam, my friend, and also other people, like I can just hear his practice just coming through, and he's not in a lucid, place so much, but you can see that sense of presence and also the kindness of heart, there. So it's good to practice now while you can, because, or another friend of mine said that she had gone to a nursing home to visit her grandmother, and she saw like all these really old people, and at that point, a lot of people didn't have like a lot of agency over the body, certainly, like, even to, incontinence, like not able to control when to go to the bathroom and stuff like that so much, but also mentally, like had less control over the mental faculties, and were kind of like rambling on in some way or whatever. But she was saying that you could notice very clearly some people were sort of rambling on in a sort of pleasant, gentle way, and other people were like really angry, bitter, something like that, right? So the quality of mind, that continuation of mind, what we cultivate now actually will continue on, even in this life of, your rebirth in the nursing home, if we ever get that far, right? It's like how you want to be in that rebirth. Like you want to be, bitter and cantankerous, or, would you like to be happy? Even when they don't have the jello you like, right? It's like, so practice now, it's good to do. Right? So, thanks. Maybe.
It's a little different perspective, but my father died about 1.5 years ago, and he's still such a presence in my mind that I don't have any particular belief around, whether he's having a continuing experience, but I'm certainly having a continuing experience of him. That's very much a product of his karma. He's a very benign presence in my mind of having been loved, so there's certainly a way in which he's, in a way, continues to live very much based on the karma of how he lived when he was alive.
Yeah, continuing to live in your mind and then also in your body, right? Because if he's through the biology and the DNA and everything, it's like that continuing in some way too.
Right.
Yeah. And we all do that all the time. So even, whether or not you die or not, we all affect each other all the time in some way, and that sort of continues. And we do that in small ways every day, right? So I've had the occasion recently to have people get mad at me, and I've had people give me the finger a lot lately. So I was driving down here on 101, and there was, it's pretty tight traffic, and then someone was trying to shift into my lane, and she didn't, I think I must have been in a blind spot. She didn't see, so I honked at her, right? And I didn't lay it on, I just honked, but she didn't like that, so she was like, and then, and then she felt so strong about that, she wanted to like follow me to continue with the finger like that, and it's like, wow, that stayed with me for a little while. Like I just noticed, like, oh yeah, what that feels like in my body, even though. I moved away and stuff, but I didn't feel, it didn't feel good in that way, right, to have that happen. It's not a huge big deal, it's like, but it has some effect, right? Or, the other is actually, I do some work like consulting and so on, and I've been working at some meetings in which there's this company like delivers coffee and muffins and stuff, and they've been like consistently late for a number of times, like super late, like 45 minutes, an hour late, or you call them, whatever. So finally, I decided it's time to actually complain to them. So I called them to complain, and then all in very wise speechish terms, and then I wrote them an email also to say like on this day you said it would come this time and it didn't, and so on, right? And I was like complimentary. I was like, the food is really good when it comes, but it's difficult, etc. And then I got this like flaming email back from someone there, just like, get over it. It's just food, this stuff like that. Not good customer service at all, right? So that impact of that, right? So that also contacts the mind stream and has some effect. So we affect each other like this all the time, for better or for worse, right? And then alternately, like kindness, like someone shows you kindness in some way. So that also has happened to me over these past few days, and in some way that you're surprised about, and that also has a big effect on us as people too, right? So we intermingle in this way all the time, right? And continue on, like whether alive or dead too. So, thank you. I think that some of the the question about the can you choose the next birth and so on, like I think it's an interesting question, and there's some schools that have like sort of more intricate teachings about that, like in Tibetan Buddhism, about different stages of bardo and this and that someone who's a bodhisattva, is a very highly realized being, actually can do some machination like that and so on. But the actuality of like this for most of us who aren't as realized, for how the way that the karma plays out, is that there's it's also like kind of complicated, but from what I understand, there's sort of like a certain kind of like strong karma that can come out, based on sort of like habitual karma that you do. But then also there can be sort of like wild card karma based on like one really positive or really negative thing that you've done that could be the strong one at that moment of rebirth. So either way, like it's good to both cultivate habitual karma that is actually positive, wholesome. So generosity, kindness, compassion, all this stuff, right? And also it's good not to do randomly bad things too. Even if you're like, well, mostly I'm cultivating this, but just, one day I'll, give someone the finger on 101. Or, it's like, whoa, that's the karma that comes up at your moment of rebirth. You might be reborn in 101 traffic for the rest of your life, and that's just a hell realm in and of itself, right? So, with no carpool lane, so, Others? Thoughts? Questions?
I don't know if this makes sense, but in this idea of resurrection, maybe this is overthinking it too much, but in this process of letting go, is there an intention to let go, or is it? Or I'm new to meditation. Is it just your breath that gets you there, or what is the process of letting go?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? The process of letting go. So, it might be helpful to think about it or talk about it in a specific instance, for example, right? So, like can you think of an example of something that has come up that is like, oh, I should let go of that, or I would like to let go of that, and
Yeah, at work. Others' actions and my reactions to them, and not wanting to be in this, knowing what better behavior is, and to react with compassion, but having this strong pull towards resentment or revenge.
Right.
And so it's similar to meditating for several years and noticing the same feelings. Suppose that anger or anxiety is what you notice every morning in meditation. It goes on for years. So even though your intention is there and you would like to get to a new state or not be angry at your coworkers, is it just your breath and staying present with it, or do you have your intention in mind? And maybe someday, in 100 years later, you are there? Or how does that work?
Yes, I think it's both. I mean, I think the intention to let go is always helpful. So, for example, as opposed to the idea that revenge is a really good thing, and so this is great that I'm spending all this time plotting revenge or anger, right? So, because you could have that idea, and then that would fuel it even more, right? Like you'd spend even more time doing that. So even if those feelings are coming up, but you're like, I know this is not the best thing for me or for the other person that I'm like stewing in this, but here I am. This is stewing, right? So that sense of like when we sit in the practice of the mindfulness, like in the meditation practice, we're practicing just seeing what's coming up, right? So that's just trying to be as best we can with whatever it is that's there. And usually it's hard in the beginning or even later on to be with some things that you don't like to see. So it's like, I don't want to be able to acknowledge like how angry I am about this, or how much revenge comes up for me, or that I'm jealous or something. So then in that practice, the first step is just to be able to know like what is really here, right? And so this is part, related to this, like what is it like to be alive, is recognizing the full spectrum of body sensations, emotions, thoughts, the whole messy caboodle of it, being able to see what that is just unflinchingly, or even if you're flinching, being able to see flinching unflinchingly, right? Just be able to see that, right? But then also part of the path, the spiritual practice, is to see that like, there's some intentions and thoughts and that lead towards happiness and are actually good to cultivate along, and there's some that are not so good, right? So then begins the practice. So then first it's like, anger, revenge, that would be in the not so good to cultivate. That's not what I want to grow in my garden of my mind, heart, this one. So how do I let it go? So you try different things, right? So you might try sort of, first of all, like stuffing it, like snuffing it, right? But that probably doesn't work so well. So that's like sort of trying to suppress it, right? And then sometimes people try like, I'm going to just explode with it. Like I'm going to just yell at someone and then that'll like let it out and then I'll be okay, right? So then you might try that, but then that also seems to like kind of encourage it along. So here, this middle path of it is being able to be present with it. So actually being able to feel it completely, but then in that moment of being able to feel and recognize it completely, then there's actually space for non-reactivity to it, for actually being able to see what it is, but then also being able to have some space to actually choose what you want to do with that. Right? And the whole process of letting go of that. So there is this promise of the ability to uproot these states. So which usually looks at first like them at least diminishing in frequency and volume, right? Before being completely uprooted, but that it is possible actually to change that which arises in the mind stream, and it can happen, sometimes gradually, and then sometimes it seems like suddenly, right? So sometimes you don't notice for a while, and then suddenly you're like, actually, that hasn't come up for a while, right? Which in some ways is like how a lot of things in life happen. Like you're trying to learn something, and then suddenly one day you're like, look, I guess I learned that, right? I can do that. But it takes like sort of gradual, like that, The letting go thing, like sometimes it can feel very active and sometimes it can feel more sort of surrendering kind of thing. So I think in different circumstances, the way to work with it is different. So sometimes even letting go feels too active, and letting go seems like you're like tossing something out the window or something. And that is often like some type of aversion, of a pushing away of something, right? So it's actually not the pushing away kind of thing that's the letting go. The true letting go would be able to see with wisdom, like this is not the way, and then actually from that wisdom, it happens automatically. So a metaphor for that is like, Buddha said, someone came to him and said, like, how do I get rid of this, like, this rage that I have? So sort of similar, the story that you're relating. Although it was like a different time, so it was probably like, in a blacksmith shop or, something like, right, in the market or something, or in the ox herding profession or something, right? So it said, if you actually really were able to pay attention to what it feels like, this actual revenge, hatred thing, then you wouldn't actually have to ask me that, because it's like picking up a burning iron ball to throw at someone else. So who does that burn first? Is like you. So if you actually feel that so strongly, then you wouldn't have to say like, oh, should I put it over here or should I put it here? Like, should I let go of the thumb first or the pinky first? Or you just be like, So actually being in touch with the suffering of it, the pain of that too, can be very helpful. So that's another level of tuning in more subtly to the truth of how things are, which is that a state like anger is actually very painful. Like it's a state of being in division, particularly like the flavor of anger that's sort of like a hatred anger, like a hatred revenge anger, like has that flavor of like that sense of separation, that sense of contraction, etc. So it's actually pretty, it gets more and more subtle to be able to notice that, but then as we notice that more and more, it becomes easier to let go of it, right? So kind of like attuning ourselves to what actually is the way to happiness and what is the way away from that, and doing that on this sort of very tactile, like direct level, in a way that you learn that like in your bones, like you learn it in your bones, so that without any shadow of a doubt, like, okay, that's not the route to happiness, like that's not a good thing, and then more and more automatically you'll be able to let go, right? So along the way, there's a long stage in which, like, it's a good idea to let go, but it's hard to, right? Which is where many of us are with something or another, right? It's like, oh, I know this is bad for me, but here it is, right? So then you just practice with compassion as best you can, right? In whatever way, and you can reflect on that, and in a thing like that where there's some like recurring thing that happens, oftentimes it's like being with that anger, then feeling that, and seeing if there's something underneath of that. Sometimes there's like a fuel underneath of that, which with anger, sometimes it's like actual self-righteousness, like I'm right and they're wrong, right? Or sometimes with anger, it actually is like a sadness and a vulnerability, that you don't want to tap into. So then it's actually dropping into that level and being able to be present with that. So it can actually be with the sadness and vulnerability of not being in control in my work or of other people or of my world. Or can I actually be in touch with this pain of this self-righteousness of thinking like I'm actually better than this person, or I know better, or they shouldn't do this, and actually drop into that and drop and drop and drop, right? So, does that make sense? It does. Okay, yeah, great, thanks. So with that, I think we've come towards the end of our time here together. So we'll have another opportunity for life and death in our practice. So we'll just sit for a few minutes together here. I am subject to aging. I have not gone beyond aging. I am subject to illness. Illness is unavoidable. I am subject to death. I have not gone beyond death. So reflecting thus, we'll bring ourselves to actually being more alive in the moment. So knowing that things can change at any moment, things do change at every moment. That all of us are going to die. Only the time of death is uncertain. The manner of death is uncertain, but death itself is absolutely certain for all of us here. So this can cause great compassion to arise in our hearts for ourselves and for all beings. All of us in the same boat. So we share the blessings from our practice with everyone here and with all beings. May all beings be at peace. May all beings be happy. May all beings be strong and healthy. May all beings be free from suffering. So thank you for your attention and conversation about the Dharma, and also much appreciation for your donation.